Welcome to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri, a Beverly Hills-based psychologist, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Modern Intimacy. Thanks for joining me here where I talk about sex, relationships, mental health, and dive into your questions with practical answers and real solutions. Each week, I share insights aimed at helping you build an authentic and healthy relationship with yourself, with others, and with your sexuality. It's time to get naked, emotionally, mentally, and on your own time, physically. Today we're going to talk about love and how to really cultivate the love that you want and the love that feels rewarding. And I want to read a quote by Bell Hooks before we get started. She says, "To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility." I love this quote by Bell Hooks because it speaks to the way in which most folks tend to think about love as a feeling and something we fall into, which can create a sense of passivity in cultivating the kind of relationships that we want. But really, love is an action. Love is a commitment. Love is a set of activities that we do to reinforce the commitment that we're making to ourselves and to our partner and to the relationship. And I'm so excited to be speaking today with Dr. Alexandra Solomon to talk a little bit more about love and how to really create a dynamic and a practice every day that helps you grow and thrive. And Dr. Alexandra Solomon, over the last 2 decades, has become one of the most trusted voices in the world of relationships. She's a professor, therapist, speaker, author, retreat leader, and media personality. And she's so passionate about translating cutting-edge research and clinical wisdom into practice and tools that people can use to bring awareness, curiosity, and authenticity into their relationships. Her work on relational self-awareness has reached millions of people. Dr. Alexandra is currently faculty member at the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University as well. Dr. Alexandra is the host of the Reimagining Love podcast, the author of 2 best-selling books, Loving Bravely, 20 Lessons at Self-Discovery to help you get the love you want, and Taking Sexy Back, How to Own Your Sexuality and Create the Relationship You Want. And Dr. Alexandra, you have a new book dropping today, Love Every Day, 365 Relational Self-Awareness Practices to help your relationship heal, grow, and thrive. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kate. I'm so glad to meet you and have a chance to speak with you.
Likewise. Thank you for being here. I've been following your work for so long on social media, and I really appreciate the commitment that you make to nuance in your work because it's easy, I think, to get lost in the things that we want to be certain in relationships, but that rarely are. And I wonder about how you really came to understand that nuance and how do we develop more compassion for ourselves in the nuance of relationships?
Right. It is what a thoughtful way for us to start. I'm excited to speak with you because I feel like you and I are kindred spirits and love to kind of play at those intersections of love and sex and modern relationships and impact of culture. And so I really do think that the way I started on this journey of wanting to be in all of the complexity, I think probably is because as somebody who's been socialized as a woman in this culture, I think that I grew up on a steady diet of fairy tales and romance novels and romanticized notions of how love should look. And if this is the right person, then it should feel this way. And if it doesn't feel this way, that means it's the wrong person. And these kind of simplified, romanticized notions. And as somebody who in college and in graduate school became deeply curious about how to deconstruct cultural ideas and really think about the messages we get and who those messages serve and what gets silenced in those messages, I think that really led me to a place of like wanting to hold ever more complexity. I think also then as somebody who went on to train to become a couples therapist, if couples therapists don't know how to sit in, 50 Shades of Grey, we're really not going to get very far with couples, because there's nothing simplistic about couples dynamics. And so, and as somebody now who's been a quarter of a century into a marriage, I know that it's so important to resist the pull of easy answers and quick fixes. And so there's something beautifully like subversive about that, of saying, we're not going to take the easy road. We're not going to do 3 steps to the best sex of your life. We're not going to do, if he doesn't do this, you're out of there. We don't do easy answers. We just train every day a bit more to hold on to the ability to just sit with all the things that are true at the very same time. All the both ands, as I call them.
It's so true. It's so true. The both and is such a beautiful way to think about how to hold space for each other, because you can love your partner so deeply and also have so much anger toward them and resentment. You can deeply have compassion and also be wildly frustrated that they're not understanding you in the moment. And I think that's really the gift of the relationship, is learning how to develop that compassion and patience with each other. And I think in contrast with yourself at the same time. I think a lot of the beauty of being in a long-term partnership is really being able to stretch and grow in your own nuance, as well as accepting that of your partners.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, that the degree to which I am struggling with self-compassion, that's the degree to which I'm going to be much more at risk of pointing my finger at my husband and insisting that it's this way. If I can't be gentle with myself, it's very hard for me to be gentle with him. And so I think that you're right, that those practices of self, so there's a way that the relationship, like growing as a partner, also invites us again and again and again to grow within ourselves. Like the self work and the intimacy work go so hand in hand. It's not, it's not one without the other. It's not that I work on myself just because I deserve to continue to care for myself and understand myself. But I also know that those practices I develop for me serve him, and serve our relationship as well.
I imagine that you are hearing about, reading about, researching disparities in emotional labor and relationships quite a bit. And I think what you just said really hones in on that. If one person in a relationship is really practicing relational self-awareness and they're growing and they are examining themselves and how they're showing up, and another partner isn't, it can make it very challenging for both partners in that partnership to feel really seen, really met, really understood. And I wonder how you encourage couples to bridge that gap if one seems to be going down this trajectory of relational self-awareness and another isn't quite at that same pace.
Yes. Well, okay, I'll offer some thoughts, but I'm really, really quite curious to hear how you have been thinking about this and talking about it, because I think it's I think it's a real problem right now. And I think it is especially a problem for cis heterosexual couples, because when this question comes up, as it so often does, it is by and large a cis hetero woman struggling with her cis male partner. I think that in part speaks to the ways in which the self-help genre, right? The self-help genre is older than social media, right? So self-help books have been around since, Bell Hooks, the quote that you read at the top of the show is from her book, All About Love, which is a book from 2000. But she brings in a lot of like the 1970s and 1980s, like kind of first generation of self-help gurus who wrote about self and relationship. So this era is old, but it has always, self-help books have always catered to a female audience. These conversations have always been much more conversation among women. And I think it becomes this vicious circle where the more this feels like it's the kind of exploration that women do, the more men feel like they can't do it, the more men can't do it, the more there's, especially in straight couples, this really big disparity. So it continues to be my desire to figure out how do we keep reaching men. I think that Instagram and social media and the ways that people now take in so much relationship content, I think even potentially amplifies that disparity, because then you're right that what you end up with is a female partner who's got frameworks and language and understanding that far exceeds her male partner. And I think that can be a problem, and it leads to those labor, those emotional labor, disparities, which I have a new term for it that I have not shared, but can I share it with you, Dr. Kate?
Because
please. I find it as wonderfully nerdy as me. So there's a philosophy professor I think she's at Pomona College. And I printed her article out, but I've got to read it. And she calls this hermeneutic labor. And it's an aspect of emotion. So emotional labor is all the ways in which women, especially women with men, tend to be thinking about and talking about and doing a lot of kind of empathy, compassion, softening. But what this professor is saying is there's kind of a subset of that called hermeneutic labor, which is the labor that women often do with men, of helping men understand themselves, asking them questions, drawing them out, helping them understand their reactions. It's a meaning-making kind of labor, not just empathy, comfort, and care, but actual meaning-making, helping men make sense of their thoughts and their feelings. And men come by this, men are sort of set back from the start because this is how we socialize boys and men in our culture. And then we wonder why we end up with these kinds of disparities. So anyways, it's a very long way of saying the disparities are real. The frustration is real. But I think there's a world of difference between a partner who is new to this work, but willing, and a partner who's contemptuous of this work. I think that's where the rubber hits the road. I think it is very different to have a partner who's sort of a diamond in the rough, who's curious but fumbling, is very different than somebody who rolls their eyes and expresses contempt for looking inward, softening language, practicing mindful communication, all of that. But okay, I'm rambling because I think this is just so central, and I'm really eager to hear where you're at with this.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that term, hermeneutic. Why can't I say this word right now? Hermeneutic labor.
A big, heavy, wonderful word. Hermeneutic labor.
Yeah, I would love to read that paper, because I think that is the essence of the disparity. I wrote a piece for Psychology Today, maybe a year or two ago now, talking about normative male alexithymia and the ways in which men, through gender conditioning, are really conditioned away from understanding their own inner landscape, their emotions. A lot of men believe themselves to be the more logical, right? Because that's the identity that they've been given. It's the cloak that they've been given to don their masculinity. But in reality, they're quite emotional, and they don't understand the way in which they even experience emotions. They don't have the embodied awareness of those physiological tells of emotions. And their female partners spend a tremendous amount of time helping them interpret, because their female partners become more aware of their emotions before men do, in many cases, not all, of course. So I think for me in the work, the question is really echoing what you highlighted. Is a partner open and willing to this kind of growth, or are they feeling resistant to it? And are they in a bit of a loyalty bind between how they conceptualize their own masculinity or identity and what they want to experience in terms of connection with their partner? And I find sometimes that really addressing what I experience to be entitlement and or shame, and many times both,
yes,
when partners are in that place, because I don't think that many male partners come to the table wanting to disappoint their partner or wanting to create a disparity, but they don't understand even where they are in the process of their own experience a lot of the time. To, as you pointed out, their female partner often has a stronger framework, because women have been trained to do this labor with far more intensity than men have been trained. So I think that once we can move through sort of the shame that translates into entitlement or defensiveness and find some compassion for that piece, there can be a softening, especially if they understand in the long run how it benefits their own interests and the relational goals that they've set with their partner.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, I want couples to be really careful that she doesn't become his alexithymia coach, his therapist, because that is more labor, obviously. And so there is, I think, this like kind of ebb and flow of him, resourcing himself. And I think that the more that he shows signs of resourcing himself, even if it's listening to a podcast, reading just an article, my gosh, starting an individual therapy relationship or joining a men's group, I think that is the ideal. I love and am here for spaces in which men can come together around this and do their own kind of collective healing. The more he takes a step in that direction, then I imagine the more patience and grace she extends to him. And as she extends more patience and grace, he feels less defensive, less shut down. And the defensiveness and the shut down, this is not to justify it, but they are so often a cover for exactly what you highlighted, which is that deep fear of disappointing her, of not measuring up in her eyes, feeling like he's coming up short. I tell you, after 25 years of being a couples therapist, when I'm working with a straight couple, I just track the way he looks at her, the way he anchors his okayness on her approval, by and large. I think it's easy for her to miss that. And so that it becomes this kind of vicious cycle of the more she's understandably conveying frustration, the more he's shutting down and feeling paralyzed. And then the less the words are coming, the less the ability to read bodily cues is there. And the less he does that, the more she's frustrated. So I think it is so important to break that cycle that can develop. And it's just him taking little doses and little steps, because that's how you learn. And because that's how you convey to your partner, okay, I get it. This matters to you. And therefore it matters to me.
Right. Right. And that little step creates such a softening and such an opening for reconnection when partnerships have become so strained. Really seeing the effort I hear over and over again from partners who have been doing the disparity or the heavy hand of the emotional labor. When they see their partner start to lean in, they feel provided for emotionally and relationally. They feel more supported. They feel more valued. And it really does create just a lot more of that safety between partners, where they can start to be more vulnerable and really feel a lot more alive together.
I do think I agree 100% with that. And I think that, I'm trying to think about, what are the early conversations that are helpful? And I think one of the places to start is, with inviting him to look at kind of early experiences in his family. I think that, and it is not, we don't ever look at family of origin as a way of throwing our parents under the bus. We are, as you said in the top of the show, we are accountable. We are accountable for how we show up today. We are accountable for doing our work today. It's not ever about throwing our parents under the bus or, being victims of our past. But I think that looking at, really as he looks at his past and his early experiences and his early socialization and what he saw modeled for him, what his, the relationship was like between the big people in his home as he was growing up. If there was, a relationship that he was witnessing, the role he played in his family, all of that can be, I think, a safer gateway in, and actually, frankly, a more effective gateway in than looking at, the couple dynamic, because the couple dynamic is so real, it's so alive, it's so right now, and we have to understand kind of the early stuff. And I think that can be, sometimes a gentler way for that work to begin by looking to the past.
And you have a really wonderful quiz on your website that helps people get an understanding of their family of origin roles. Why don't we break down how you've conceptualized family roles and how it does play a part in the here and now relationship that someone's experiencing?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the families we grow up in, I call them our original love classrooms. Like that was when we're little, we're like little social scientists. We are taking in so much information, sometimes explicitly, but mostly implicitly, so much information about how relationships look, the shape, the form, the tone, the texture of relationships. But we're just internalizing it. We don't know what it is. We don't know what to call it. It just is like the air that we breathe. And I think we're in an interesting cultural moment because there is so much looking at the impact of the past. And it's very often around trauma, right? Intergenerational transmission of trauma is a really big topic right now. And it is vital because there is so much trauma that needs to be attended to and processed. But I think sometimes what we miss there is just the ability to have a nuanced conversation or understanding just about family dynamics and the ways in which in all families we play a role, we take on a role. But especially I think the more a family system is stressed, whether it's with experiences of poverty, marginalization, or addiction, or marital conflict, or employment strain, whatever, work stress, whatever. When a system is strained, a system can get kind of rigid, and it can demand or insist in sneaky and subtle ways that people play a role. And so kids often get cast in those roles. And as kids, my gosh, we will play any role we're handed because we just need to, we need to belong, we need to be part of the family. And so, right. So this is something I'm deeply passionate and nerdy about, helping people have ways of understanding their early experiences. So we developed this quiz, and I've broken down 6 different roles that we can play in the families that we grow up in. And within each of these family roles, there's a gift, there's a gift that we get from being, from being sort of in this role. There's a challenge that we often develop. And then that, having an understanding of the role we played, then can help us understand, okay, so how does that role show up today? How do I act today at times the way that I acted in my family growing up?
I really appreciated in looking at your model the way you did highlight the gifts of each role, because these roles that we play are roles that we step into, one, because we're asked to implicitly in our family system, but we adopt certain roles because they're adaptive at some point in our early lives. And they do come with a lot of skills for relational happiness and success later in life, if we know how to really channel them in constructive ways and allow the adaptation to sort of stop before it becomes an unconscious repetition that actually gets in our way relationally.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So one of the roles, for example, is this was the role that I played in my family growing up, was the perfect one, like the sort of straight A, gold star on the forehead academically student, and the function that there was a family level function for that. My family struggled a lot as I was growing up. There were lots of different challenges that individuals and challenges and strains within the adults who raised me, and as well as between the adults who raised me. And I think that having a child who excelled academically, the family function of that was that we must be okay, right? We must be okay if somebody's doing as well as as they're doing. And there was a function for me because being really intense around my academics gave me a sense of control in what would have otherwise felt like a very out of control situation. And it gave me an excuse to step away and close my door because I had to go study. And so I think that definitely was a way in which I was spared a lot of exposure to what would have been overwhelming and confusing by putting on my headphones and turning on what would have been a Walkman back in those days and just getting my work done. So that there were the gifts in that. There was a function that served my family. There was the gift that I got from that. And then there's the growing edge. And the growing edge, of course, today is the ways in which my own perfectionism and difficulty letting myself relax affects me and has fallout on my relationship as well.
I'm sure. Yeah, I think I'm curious your perspective on how many roles in a family folks can play. I remember looking at the framework and I really identified with a few of the different a few of the different roles, the perfect one, the easy one, and the rebel. And I think over the course of my life, I've played many different roles for my family, some of them more loudly and with more success than others. But I wonder how many folks, in your opinion, will find themselves in multiple iterations of those roles.
Right. Yeah. As I've been working with people, on this, using this tool and using this framework at different conferences and retreats and, things I've been doing with it over the last 6 months or so, I think that's really true. People have sometimes, I think that we're a blend. So I think very often there's like one or two that rise to the top, or sometimes I think it's chronological, I was the perfect one until my family hit this crisis point, and then I became an easy one because the easy one is the one who just kind of goes with the flow and doesn't ask much of anybody. And sometimes we become an easy one because whatever, a parent has got a really scary health diagnosis, or somebody has lost their job, and so there's just sort of a need for that person to scale, for that kid to pull back, shut down, and just kind of go along to get along. So I think sometimes we have to, our role shifts because of a turning point in the family system. But yeah, I think that there's as is the case whenever we try to take the complexity of humanity and put it into 6 buckets, there's going to be overlap and things, in different blends. And so I for sure want people to use this the way you'd use any tool, which is I think I'm some of this and some of that, or in my childhood, I was this, and then in my adolescence, I became that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how does understanding these different roles work in conjunction with developing relational self-awareness, the whole premise of the book that's out today for you?
Right. Yeah. So the book that came out today is, it's a really different, I think that traditionally, that my first 2 books are traditionally much more like sit down and, read it cover to cover and do the work. And both of my first books have a lot of tools and practices and application, because I really want people to have a base of understanding, but then also a way to translate it and put it into their own lives. But what's different about Love Every Day is it's just little microdoses. It is a book of microdoses. I have always, since I was a kid, I've always loved a 365 book, a year of this and a year of that. So it's really so fun for me to now have a book out in the world that is a 365. So you get to have this book for a whole year. Whenever you pick it up, you start on that day, and just each day you have a little something to think about, something to feel about, an exercise to do, a question to respond to. And so it is, I think, so much of cultivating, so much of an intimate relationship is the cultivation, right? It's the how am I showing up today? And even though in the book is for somebody, whether they are partnered or single, because oftentimes people who are single are in that period of between relationships, and they're making sense of a relationship that perhaps didn't go the way they wanted it to go. And they're trying to figure out when and how they're going to step back into relationships. So I think it also is a book that serves somebody who's in that integrative, figuring out where I've been and where I'm going kind of place, just to have each day a place to kind of bring your awareness within yourself and to look at your patterns. So that is the goal of the book, is that it's all about looking at our patterns, what's working for us, and then what needs to be tweaked and shifted, and having lots and lots of support to do that. I think it's marvelous that we're in this time now where therapy is normalized, much more so, where we've got podcasts in our ears and we've got journals, in our fingertips. And I think that is so much like the work that people are willing to do right now on themselves and on their relationships is only for the better. It is all, research has, as you know, research has found that this is where it's at, right? Working on understanding our relationships and being willing to bring a kind of presence and skill to relationships has ripple effects everywhere.
It does. It being a part of and a contributing part of a really healthy relationship has so many benefits in pretty much every other domain of life. Because when our primary relationships feel really secure, really sound, really safe, really alive, we have a lot of confidence to go out into the world and do the other things that are really important. And we have the resources emotionally, cognitively, and physiologically when we feel really secure. So investing in a relationship and in your own relational self-awareness is a really smart investment strategy for a strong foundation throughout the course of the rest of your life and your own survival. And I think your book does such a great job of giving people those tools in small digestible doses so that they can have a sense of empowerment. And I don't like to use the word control when we're talking about relationships, but they have a connection point to a sense of action, right? And action points that they can take instead of feeling sort of helpless as if a relationship happens to them or in front of them.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Which really is our default setting. If we aren't engaging in these kinds of practices, that is how a relationship will feel, is that it is something that we are at the mercy of our partner's mood. Mm-hmm. We are at the mercy of our partner's ability to bring us give us an orgasm. Like all of this kind of passive framing of it happens, the relationship happens to us. We are just kind of at the mercy of how the other person is behaving. And I think especially for those of us who have been given the message that we are powerless and voiceless, I think that becomes that takes on an added layer where it feels so much so. I think it makes it really easy for us to miss how impactful we are.
We've been using the term relational self-awareness, and that's part of the language that you are writing about in your book and part of your framing. Can you help us understand a little bit about what you mean by that and how it really factors into the development of a healthy relationship?
Yeah, relational self-awareness really is the through line of all of the work that I do, and it is relational self-awareness is a curious and compassionate, ongoing relationship that we have with ourselves that becomes a foundation for a thriving, intimate partnership. So it is all of what we've been talking about. It is there are technically 5 pillars of relational self-awareness, but basically relational self-awareness is about understanding the family system that we grew up in, understanding how we communicate, what happened, where we go when we are frustrated in a conversation, the ways in which we become less effective, less mindful, less skilled around communication when we're upset. Relational self-awareness is about also understanding the impact of culture, how we've been socialized around gender and race and body and sexuality and gender identity and all of that. So understanding the impact of large systems on how we show up. So it's kind of this comprehensive way of just being ever curious about what we've been taught, what we've internalized, and then how that shapes us for better and for worse. And so it's basically a commitment to taking a growth mindset, to being willing to be forever students of ourselves, of our partners, and of intimacy. And that is relational self-awareness. That's ongoing practices.
Yeah. And I think ongoing is a really important thing to highlight because we are dynamic creatures, right? We don't just live in one black and white static existence. We are always evolving. We are always growing and changing and being impacted by our environment, by the other relationships that we're in. So the dance of interpersonal neurobiology is that our brains are impacted by our interactions and vice versa. So we can grow in a really healthy, healing way when we have intentional, positive interactions with other folks. And then we can be hurt really significantly when that's not in place. So I think about what I'm hearing you say is a practice of really shoring up a sense of resilience within oneself and relational resilience, because the more knowledge you have about how you've already been impacted and shaped by the experiences that you just described, I think that gives you a lot more awareness to practice with tenderness and with care to the people that you do love and want to have healthy relationships with, because it does create a lot more sensitivity to what they might be bringing to the dynamic and what you are. And one of the posts that you mention in your book that I love, I don't remember what date it was, But you said to love someone across time is to become intimate with the landscape of their fragility. And I just thought that was so beautiful. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Oh, that is so, yeah. I was just thinking about that idea as you were talking, because I think it's what's so confusing about a long-term intimate relationship, especially when you know, and long-term might be whatever long-term is for you. You know, year 3 may feel long-term for you because this is the longest you've ever been with somebody. I think what's so confusing is the more you get to know somebody, the more you feel like you know them, and the more you feel like you get it. Okay, you got them. And the more you create a stable container of, you know, we live together or we're married together, you know, then the more it feels like, okay, so we're done. We're in it. And I think it then becomes easy to lose sight of the curiosity, and easy to forget that they're also changing and growing. I think it's so easy to, you know, I think we can feel our own growth much more readily and easily than we can feel our partner's growth. But our partner is also changing, even if they're not like, quote unquote, working on themselves, they're changing. They've not ever been 37 years old before, or they've not ever lived this far away from their parents before, or they've not ever, you know, they haven't started a new job like this or had a promotion like this. So they're forever changing, which is what you're saying with the piece about the tenderness, like just knowing that they're also experiencing things for the first time, or they're also in this season of life that they have not yet been in before. And even if they are maybe not wearing their tenderness on their sleeve, there's a need to also be curious about what the changes are like for them. What are they working on? What's their evolution like? Even if it's not a conscious evolution, life is evolving us, you know, always, again and again and again. And I think that's easy to lose sight of. My husband and I have been together for 25 years, and we are in a season we're beginning to be empty nesters. And so it's really, in this, when a change is kind of this stark, I think it's a bit easier to be like, okay, how are you and who are we and what's going on? But there are times when the changes are more subtle than that, and we really do need to keep an eye. That's part of what it means to be engaged in a relationship or working on a relationship, is being really curious about what is front of mind for our partner. What are their current stresses? What are their current hopes? What's bringing them joy these days? And that's, I think, in large part how a relationship stays fresh. I think so many of us worry about being in a relationship that's stale or stuck. But I tell you what the big antidote is to staleness and stuckness. It's just curiosity. It really is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Curiosity allows us to constantly rediscover ourselves and our partner. And the novelty that we find in rediscovering each other creates so much opportunity for fresh sparks and for a lot of enjoyment in just being excited and learning all the time about one another. When we stop being curious, we really do run the risk of feeling really flat in our relationships.
Mm-hmm. 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 As you're saying that, it's making me think, like, I think people who are drawn to your podcast, my podcast, this new book that we're talking about, I think those of us, you know, these sort of the seekers of the world, I think that we sometimes need to get out of our heads a bit also, and know that playing or, you know, going to a concert with our partner, like just the things that are kind of fun, no brainers, simple, easy, like we get to have that too. You know, the work is important, but the silliness, the rest, the escape together is also important. I think some of us who are invested in working on ourselves can become a bit forgetful about, oh, you get to put it down and also just like be in the relationship rather than working on the relationship. So I'm glad that you're bringing in those ideas of like fun and play and enjoyment. Oh, right. Enjoyment. You get to also enjoy. It's the fruits of the labor. You know, you get to just enjoy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, what if you had one or two of the prompts from your new book that you would hold as some of your favorites or most important, what are they? What would they be?
I think that one of the most, I think a really important prompt is, that I love for for a frustrating moment or a difficult conversation is bringing in these magical words, which are the story I'm telling myself. I think that's a really important, prompt/tool is the next time you enter a moment of frustration with your partner or your friend or your coworker, rather than just saying you did this or why didn't you do this, making sure, just sort of describing what happened. You didn't send that email, whatever, when you said you would. The story I'm telling myself is that the things that are important to me don't matter to you. And what that does is it slows our own meaning making and assumption process down, while also giving a little bit of vulnerability, sharing a bit of vulnerability with the other person and saying, like, in a moment like this, I'm at risk of feeling like I don't matter to you, that the things that are important to me aren't important to you. And so it gives our partner a chance to have empathy, like, ugh, that must be a terrible feeling. And also, correct the record. Like, yes, it makes sense that it feels like that your concerns are not important to me. And I don't want you to feel that way. And here's how I'm going to rectify it. But it slows down that kind of finger pointing blame process. So that, I think, is one, just working in that language of the story I'm telling myself is really vital.
I love that. I love that. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of another one of the posts that I remember reading, and the date is escaping me again, but the question at the top was, what is it like to be with me right now? And I thought, how beautiful of a question, because it immediately prompts self-reflection. What am I bringing to this moment? And it suggests some empathy for your partner right away. And empathy can be so hard to find when you are warring with your partner, having the conflict that you don't know how to solve, especially the repetitive ones that come up all the time in different iterations. Empathy can be so challenging. So that question, what is it like to be with me right now, really gives a lot of pause to reconsider, how am I contributing to this? And what is my partner seeing and hearing and feeling as I'm approaching them with whatever it is I'm bringing? And it's such an artful way to take accountability without necessarily going into a place of shame, which can often be felt when our partner does hold up the mirror and we're not ready to see it.
Yes, it is far easier, right? It's a little bit nicer when we hold up our own mirror rather than when our partner holds up a mirror, because that is, and I think we can lovingly hold up a mirror to our partner rather than like a look at yourself, like listen to your voice, look at how red your cheeks are, look at what, whatever. But I think there can be loving ways to invite self-reflection. But yes, I think you're right that the best practice is for both people to be willing to hold up their own mirror. And that question of what's it like to be with me right now is a question we ask ourselves. How am I coming across? What's my facial expression? What's my body positioning? What's my tone? Like, what is the energy that I'm bringing into this conversation? And it's, again, easy to miss, especially easy for those of us who felt invisible, unseen, marginalized, voiceless when we were growing up. I think it can be really hard for us to start to look at the power of our presence in our relationships today. So I think it can be even easier to miss that. And so that's a really gentle way of saying, okay, what's it like to be with me right now? How am I coming across? How do I look from my partner's perspective? So a little bit of like kind of taking yourself out of your own perspective and trying to experience yourself through your partner's eyes. And like you said, it's not about shaming ourselves, because shame's going to take us even further from connection. It's just about an invitation to say, what do I need? Do I need a glass of water? Do I need to pause and step away? What do I need just even a deep breath to kind of pivot and show up in this conversation a bit differently than I am right now.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard. It's a series of stumbling and trying again and asking for a redo, for sure.
Absolutely.
That's another tool that I love, is asking for a redo.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I think it really highlights that being in partnership is really about learning to give each other tremendous patience, tremendous forgiveness, and honoring the fragility and the messiness that we will bring in our imperfect moments. How would you recommend couples use your book together?
Well, I love the idea of couples. It's a really beautiful book, and it has this bookmark so you can kind of mark your place. And I love the idea, even if a couple just kind of keeps it on the kitchen table or, whatever, on the bedstand, wherever it goes. And even if they don't sit down and read it together, if they each take a peek at it that day, and then have a conversation about it later in the day or in the evening, or what'd you think of that one, or what came up for you, or that one came with 5 questions. You want to try and answer one of the questions together. I think that it can be a lovely thing to just sort of start. I love, this is the way that my Instagram feed has been used for years, which is just these prompts, these little micro doses serve as conversation starters, and they serve to start a conversation in a way that so that it goes a bit differently than it would have, so that the couple together, rather than going down the same well-trodden path, gets a chance to kind of carve a new path together, start a conversation a bit differently from a different place, come at the same sort of relational knot from a different angle. And so I like the idea of a couple, each of them perhaps reading it separately, digesting it a bit, and then opening a little conversation. And I don't want people to feel like they have to do it every single day. They're going to have this book forever and ever, hopefully. And so, pick it up, put it down, even if a couple commits to once a week or twice a week, or they read it, each day by themselves. And then once a week they come together and talk about whichever post, or whichever entry stood out to them most that week. So I think there's a number of ways, and there's no right and no wrong, but the intention here is that couples have some time. I think it's part of why couples therapy is as effective as it is that when a couple is in couples therapy, they are saying once a week, every week, we turn our attention to this relationship. But you don't need a couples therapist to do some version of that, which is saying on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we hold 15 minutes to have a conversation, and we can use these prompts to start and spark that conversation.
I really love that. I love that so much. I think having these really small morsels that are actually quite rich, they're nutrient rich, even though they're small morsels every day, it really does give couples a place to start. And that can be the most challenging thing about figuring out how to improve a relationship is, what do we do? How do we start? How do we get beyond our stuck points? And so having a guide like this can be a great way to figure out what resonates for us as partners, and how can we use what's here as a launch point for growth together. And I think I'm so grateful that you came on the podcast to talk about this today. Where can folks find out more about you, learn more about your work, or even work with you?
Yeah. Well, a great place to start is my website, dralexandrasolomon.com. And there you'll find links to social media. Instagram is at dr.alexandra.solomon. But there's links to social media. There's a blog. I mean, my gosh, hundreds of blog articles, a link to the podcast, Reimagining Love, as a weekly podcast. And then, of course, links to the book. And the book is available wherever books are sold. I love to send people in the U.S., to bookshop.org, because that is the way to connect with your local independent bookseller and support them and have access to the book in that way. But the book's also available as an ebook and an audio book, but it sure is pretty beautiful, if I may say so myself, a really beautiful book. So I love the idea of people having that physical kind of old school version of it. They can hold in their hands and mark up and, pass back and forth.
Love that. I love that so much. Well, thank you again, Dr. Alexandra, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Stay connected with me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Everyone has questions, and I want to answer as many as I can. So feel free to email your questions to question@getnakedpodcast.com. If you're looking for a free 30-minute consultation with me or someone on my team, visit modernintimacy.com. And don't forget to join our newsletter, Modern Intimacy, on Substack. Let's meet back here next week. A new episode drops every Tuesday. Disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy and does not constitute a professional relationship with Dr. Kate Balestrieri or Modern Intimacy. This podcast is strictly for education and entertainment purposes only.